Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Will Barclay. Will Barclay represents the 124th Assembly District, and in New York State, the 124th District includes parts of both Oswego and Onondaga County. So we thank you folks all throughout central New York State for joining us for our program today. Will Barclay, nice to see you.
Good to be here, Mike.
We got I think the question that is overriding this legislative session now, what is left of this 2012 legislative session, is what are you guys still doing in town? I mean, there's talk that the legislature should go home. You got the budget done on time. You did so much heavy lifting just before the budget got passed. And by heavy lifting, I mean you passed bills pertaining to redistricting laws in the future, casino gaming, teacher evaluations, the DNA data bank, and I'm leaving something else out there. But there was a whole series of... Is there anything left to do?
It is quiet, Mike. I mean, and there is a good argument that we should get out of town. Very often people say, well, when they're not in town, they can't do any damage. And I happen to believe that to a certain degree. So I would love to see the legislature end early because there are always big issues, but it doesn't look like any big issues are going to be taken up before the end of session. The only thing that we obviously have to do, there's a lot of local bills that affect local municipalities or localities that individual legislators sponsor, and very often those get held up at the end as a negotiating point with the majorities. So I guess we're holding out for those, and it looks like we're going to finish session in June, which is good, but we're going to hold out for another month or so to get that kind of stuff taken care of. But you're exactly right. As far as big issues, unfortunately, and I'm not sure anything's going to be taken up. And there is one big issue that desperately needs to be taken up. And last year we passed a property tax cap, and one of the promises of passing the property tax cap that we're going to institute some mandate relief for school districts and localities so they could have some relief in trying to fit their budgets within the property tax cap. But hopefully we can take up mandate relief. It's going to be critical. This year it looks like a lot of the municipalities and school districts are getting through their budget process within the cap, or some have overridden the cap, but at some point there's going to be a real pain coming through to localities and trying to meet that unless we provide them some real mandate relief. And we did do pension reform. Maybe that was the one you were forgetting about.
That sounds right.
Which was a step in the right direction,
yeah.
But that doesn't do it. That's more of a long-term solution. It doesn't really help anything immediate for the immediate budget. So there's a lot of mandate relief that we could provide that would provide almost instantaneous relief for school districts and localities.
We are taping this program in the middle of the month of May, the week that all of New York goes to the polls to vote on school budgets, if they're school board members or any other sort of thing that the school districts have to put before the voters. It is happening this week. By the time you folks see this show, it will have already come and gone. So let's talk a little bit about what is the state of business right now for schools and how this property tax cap is affecting them, and the sorts of things that could come out of Albany to give them some relief. School districts are having I don't want to say a hard time, probably some of them would classify it that way, but they are being forced to live within their means. Some people will say that's not a bad thing because they're used to seeing double-digit property tax increases year to year to year, and that has come screeching to a halt. And you're seeing, the first year was pretty tough. We heard lots about teacher layoffs and all that.
Right.
We're hearing a little bit less of it now, and there seems to be sort of a new culture about all that. But we're still hearing school district officials say Albany's still got to figure out some way to provide us a way so that we can provide better services to the kids in the classroom.
Well, let's point out two things. First of all, you're right. I mean, they still are facing very tough budgetary times. The state's facing a tough time. But needless to say, one of the good things that we did in this year's budget is we're able to drive one more state aid towards education, which I think is always a good thing. But we also were able to drive it to more to low-wealth school districts. Remember, the governor had a $250 million pot of money that he was going to use for competitive grants. The legislature, after we went through the budget, said, no, you need to really drive this money to low-wealth school districts. And I think that's helped tremendously obviously for low-wealth school districts, but helping them live within the cap and be able to fund some of the mandates that they have. So that's one, I think, very positive issue. I would say also, and you're right, in my district, most of the schools really are living within that 2%. And they did it. They have accomplished
exactly.
Which is great. In fact, I even have APW in my district actually is cutting believe it or not, is cutting their budget, which is almost unheard of, and their school tax rate's going to go down. So I think that's obviously some good news. I think that's a result of the cap. Needless to say, mandates are still a tremendous budgetary problem for school districts. I think one of the problems we have is the state ed department. As I've gotten on this before, the regions that run the state ed department are really not accountable to anybody. They're appointed by essentially the speaker, because it's controlled. Every member of the legislature gets one vote. So with 150 members in the Assembly and 62 members in the Senate, obviously the majority in the Assembly, along with the minority in the Senate, can control that process, which is ultimately controlled by the speaker. Those people really don't answer back. I would love to see the education department be put under the control of the governors, because he obviously has to answer the people in New York in order to get reelected. I think that would go a long ways to have a responsive Department of Education back to the school districts, so they wouldn't be getting carried away with all these mandates, really education mandates. If I don't hear from the teachers and from the school districts, my wife, who actually is a teaching assistant in Pulaski, I hear from her too. The mandates, the stuff that they have to file, whether it's now the testing, the grading of the test, I mean, it goes right down the line. It's really very problematic. And look, I think we all understand that we need accountability in our schools. We want to make sure our kids are getting top-notch education, because we're certainly paying a lot of money for that in New York State. But at the same time, I think there's got to be a way that you can balance that, so it's not taking up all the teaching time, and we're not living in such a rigid schedule that maybe some of the more creative type teaching gets thrown out the window. So and I think a lot of that emanates from the Department of Education. It's not really a structure that's designed for innovation in education, and one of the reasons because the oversight is just not there, I think.
It's been interesting to watch the school districts make that adjustment, just as the state of New York has made an adjustment over the past couple of years in its budgeting practices. It used to be no matter what was going on with the economy in the state or the nation, New York's legislature always would, and governors too, would think, oh, we're just going to increase spending by whatever percentage we feel like,
right,
on any given year.
Right.
And it's interesting to watch now. You see states like California are having big problems with that. There are still counties in New York State that haven't quite gotten the message yet.
Right.
I think the 2009 national downturn in the economy has really created an opportunity, and we've seen the New York legislature pass that along down to school districts now, to just live within your means.
Right.
I mean, it's a pretty obvious
and that's true, and that is
lesson.
maybe the good news. We have made some hard decisions against a lot of pressure from special interests here in Albany that were opposed to some of the policy changes we made in the budgets the last 2 years, and as a result, New York, I think you could argue, is in much better shape than a lot of different states around the nation. California was the one that jumps out at you. They have a $16 billion shortfall, and the drastic measures they're going to have to take, because they didn't take these relatively drastic measures beforehand, are going to be incredible, and they're going to include huge cuts to education and health care, and include big tax increases. That's just probably going to compound the problems they have out there economically.
Well, it's almost like they're taking a page out of New York's old textbook.
That's right.
Where they're looking to I think on the ballots they've got tax increases on the 1%. Go after the rich, but they're still finding, as they do that the revenues are going down. The rich are running away from the state.
They're running away, and it's just not, frankly, there's just not enough revenue there. If they really are going to try to tax their way out of the problem, they're going to have to go after the middle class.
There's a lot of similarities between New York and California.
It really is true, and frankly, our economy is not booming by any stretch of the imagination here in New York State. But again, what we've done, whether it's a property tax cap or other things, is we've started to put limits on our spending, and as a result of that, we just aren't in as bad a shape as other states. One thing I don't think any of us expected is this economy, this economic downturn has lasted as long as it has. I mean, you keep thinking it's going to tick up, and there's some signs that the economy ticks up, and then the next quarter, my God, bad news comes back out again. And obviously the news that we had this past quarter was with unemployment and others. This isn't good news. It's going to take something to get us out of this, and I'm not sure what it is, but I know one thing in government, we can't assume that we're going to spend and act like we're in a boom time when really we're not in a boom time, because that is just going to cause farther problems down the line.
You and I have been here for enough years to know that that's a radical change in the culture for the New York State legislature and for New York State government to even be in that thought process, because it used to be no matter what, the national or the state economy said, well, New York, we're still going to spend. It'll be fine. We'll borrow.
Right.
We will tax more. Everything will be fine. Until we got into a place where California is right now.
Right. And the other good, I mean, frankly, it has been a bipartisan solution. I just think it's not as contentious. This is my 9th year in Albany, and this is probably the least contentious year I've been involved in it. And in both the Assembly and this, I can't speak necessarily for the Senate, but it seems, as an outsider looking in, and certainly with the governor, I mean, it seems like we realize that this really was a crisis, needs to be, and congratulations to the governor. He did provide leadership to some degree on that stuff, too, to allow us maybe to make some of these difficult decisions. He was able to stand up to a number of the special interests.
Let me get a reaction from you on a totally different piece of business. There was a court ruling recently, and it has a lot of people scratching their heads, that says, you know what, if somebody wants to watch child pornography on their computers, it's okay. That's an all right thing to do. As long as they're not looking at it and saving it to their hard drives, they can watch it all they want.
Yeah,
who understands that?
It does seem to be a head scratcher, although, you know, who knows what they're basing the legal decision on that. But that's right. The Court of Appeals did just rule, I think, last week, saying that you could view child pornography. You just can't download it or, you know, distribute it.
Can't own it.
Oh, yeah, right.
You can't possess it.
I'm not sure I understand the technical difference between downloading it and viewing it on your computer. Obviously, I can understand the distribution of child pornography. Otherwise, anyways, it's ridiculous, and it needs to be fixed legislatively. That's why either I'm going to draft a bill, which we have, or there's another bill that's been introduced in the Assembly, go out and get on that bill to make sure that that changes. And we look, clearly, this is something that government needs to be involved in, something that we need to stop. It's a terrible, terrible crime, and the idea that anyone can get off for viewing child pornography and have that be illegal seems, you know, a head scratcher. So we're going to quickly, hopefully, that's one thing maybe we can get done before the end of the session, is try to address that Court of Appeals decision, so we can make sure that people who are viewing child pornography, there's a law out there that they can be prosecuted under and obviously convicted if that's what they're doing.
One other idea that is on the table for consideration, and this comes directly from the Speaker of the Assembly, who said at the beginning of this session that if he had one legislative priority, it would be increasing the minimum wage. And this is kind of a complicated thing to understand or explain, because I think a lot of people watching this program would say, well, it's like you're increasing the minimum wage maybe $1. I mean, yeah, I mean, those people that are trying to make ends meet on the minimum wage, what's the harm in that? But there are others who look at that and go, oh, that could be one of the worst things to happen to the state. I mean, that could just drive what is already a fragile, bad economy into an even worse place.
Yeah, and I think I think you're dead on with that, Mike. And I think there's been plenty of studies done that shows by increasing the minimum wage, actually you increase unemployment. Because the first things, anyone who gets mandated, you know, small business particularly, first thing they do, if they can't afford it, they're going to lay off people. And particularly it hits usually younger people that have not been in the workforce all that long. They're the ones that tend to see their unemployment rates skyrocket as a result of this. So I'm not sure mandating what people have to pay, you know, an increase right now is probably the right thing to do. The other thing about it, it really can make New York uncompetitive with its sister states around us and with the rest of the nation. I think if we're going to increase the minimum wage, it really needs to be done at a national level, so the competition is equal across the board. You know, I hear from Southern Tier where they're just going to pop right into Pennsylvania as soon as you know, any store that wants to open, a retailer or whatever, the restaurant or whatever, those do it in Pennsylvania rather than New York State if our minimum wages increase. So
it's almost like it's almost like a mandate.
It is
right?
a mandate. I mean, there's no question about it. It's a mandate. And look, within reason, it can make sense at times. At times, I could even support it, but this does not. I mean, as we mentioned, the economy is still weak. We got to do whatever we can to get these small businesses to grow, not put further shackles on them that will result in them laying off more people. That's just the opposite of what we should be doing right now.
And that's why the legislature's still in session, having those kinds of conversations. And we thank Will Barclay for joining us.
It's good to be here, Mike.
Filling us in on what's going on here at the state capitol. Thank you folks, too, for spending your time with us. And we'll hope to see you soon for our next Assembly Calendar.